Welcome to Sip of Cinema, the only podcast to be best friends with Hans Zimmer and make it out alive. I'm Alex.
I'm Andres. Does Hans Zimmer have a lot of enemies?
I don't know. He might after today. I heard you have a little bit of tea about him. And speaking of tea, we're not drinking it today, but we are having hot toddies. All right. So if you're not familiar, hot toddies are the famed drink that are favored by vocalists everywhere. It's a great way to have a little bit of a drink while still soothing the vocal cords. If you want to have a hot toddy for yourself, it's real easy. It's just whiskey, hot water, a little bit of lemon juice, a little bit of honey. Throw a cinnamon stick in there for some flair, and you're good to go. Now, I just talked about how to make a hot toddy, Andreas.
Yes, sir.
Why are we sipping hot toddies today?
I'm so glad you asked, Alex.
Anytime.
So today's subject matter is film scores versus film soundtracks, hence the singers.
Mm-hmm.
Pros, cons, great uses of them, interchanging them, long-lasting impacts, the whole nine. So first things I want to settle is what makes a score versus what makes a soundtrack.
Great question. We're all wondering.
Yeah, I know you're on the edge of your seat. So in my eyes, this isn't a Webster Dictionary definition introduction, but when I think score, I think something that was composed by a composer. Doesn't have to be a full orchestra or anything like that. And we'll talk about a few examples where it's not a full orchestra.
Right.
But there is one composer or two composers or whatever that sit down and work on this score, record it with the set group, whatever. Soundtrack,
however,
yes,
a little bit more eclectic, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be more of a combination of songs that may have been made for the movie, may have not been. Usually a variety of artists composed together to kind of just be the songs that, you know, curate the mood throughout the course of a film, right? Or is there any additional detail that you can add to that?
I mean, essentially, I was just going to say if it's a song that's not composed by one set assigned hired composer. So a lot of movies with scores with the composer still have soundtracks as well, where it'll be the score throughout, and then there's one needle drop or whatever you want to say, or two or whatever. So to get things started, I would like to dive in to some iconic scores or soundtracks, just so people can, you know, kind of ease into it.
Get a taste, get a flavor of what we're talking about right now.
So when I think iconic scores, obviously you have John Williams, Jaws, Jurassic Park, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, what have you.
Right. Yeah. Absolute God amongst men when it comes to it.
Yes. But when I think of the quintessential score, the first thing that comes to my mind is Lord of the Rings.
Kung Fu Panda.
Oh, well. I think of Howard Shore's work on Lord of the Rings. No one will ever convince me that this is not the best score of all time.
No, 100%. The Shire? Or there's one specific title, I think it's one of his most famous ones, is about, you know, the opening scene in the Shire that is just ear candy.
Exactly. And then everything from the music that's played in Rivendell to the battle themes to, you know, the main theme, and just it's a score where you can say there's multiple pieces in it that are just so recognizable, whereas there's a lot of scores where people can say, oh yeah, it has that one track, song, whatever, but the rest of it is not as deeply engraved. Right. Where I feel like Lord of the Rings is the one true film where everything is super recognizable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everything really plays into the film so well. I think some of John Williams' works, not to hate on him or anything like that, I think he's an absolute gift to cinema. But like Jaws, for example, the theme, great. The rest of it isn't deeply...
Name another song.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, Exactly. I do think you make a good point that is something that scores don't typically excel at. There's usually, if there's not one particular song that winds up being the standout song, that is the iconic song that symbolizes the entire film the way Jaws does, or the way that, I don't know, I guess you could call like the March of the Empire or whatever in Star Wars, like
the Imperial March,
Imperial March, yeah. That's pretty much the one for Star Wars. There are a couple others that stand out, like the Cantina song, but
And the main theme.
yeah, well, yeah, the main theme. But usually that's not what you're listening to the majority of the time. Whereas I think of soundtracks as typically being almost every song is supposed to be a standalone kind of banger.
Mm-hmm.
That there's just a different mentality there because with a soundtrack, usually you're trying to emphasize the feeling of a specific moment, whereas a score can really just be about atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. I think a really great recent example of that with the soundtrack where it's just getting a bunch of artists trying to make bangers. Barbie.
Yep, say it. Yeah.
Absolutely. You have the Dua Lipa song. You have Charlie XCX on a song. Billie Eilish on a song.
Lizzo.
Yeah, exactly. The narration. Yeah. So, and I'm by no means harping on that.
No.
Or saying that's a bad thing.
No, there's some bangers there.
It's a different approach with different pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
One of those big pros being marketability.
Yep.
Because you can attach these musical artists to a film and say, hey, you're a big Dua Lipa fan?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she's on the Barbie soundtrack.
Yeah, absolutely. You can expand the brand and your marketable audience immensely by going with a soundtrack that way. Of course, that is just one way to go about a soundtrack. There's a couple others that we're going to wind up talking about later in this episode. But I think with the Barbie soundtrack in particular, it does wind up coming across very on brand for Barbie in the sense that I kind of find that soundtrack to be not bad by any means, but kind of plastic. If I don't know if that's no, okay, hear me out.
No, I'm not saying that, but yeah.
It's bright, it's pop, it's Barbie, and while it's not necessarily a soundtrack I'm going back to every day, I do think that it fits well for the movie. I don't know. I mean, I couldn't see Barbie doing a score the way that its competitor did. Oppenheimer, yeah.
We're never gonna stop talking about Barbenheimer.
No. It's like the quintessential movie going experience.
Yeah,
it defined our lifetime.
Yeah. But Oppenheimer is a great example of a really well done and effective score.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be surprised if it doesn't win the Oscar for it, but I think in modern times, a great way to gauge the impact and the effect of music, and you can call this dystopian if you want, but is how popular is it on TikTok?
You're not wrong. I mean, that's pretty much the way to judge the success of almost anything nowadays. Yeah. I mean, TikTok Shop is also blowing up. Not that we're trying to be sponsored or anything, but there are several moments from the Oppenheimer soundtrack that became viral sounds on TikTok that I still see on my For You page nowadays. And I got to say, not really seeing any Barbie, and maybe that's just because Barbie was so marketed into like this bubble of we are the Barbie movie. This is the Barbie soundtrack and everything's Barbie. People probably got played out on that. Whereas the score from Oppenheimer, while very Oppenheimer-y, it can have kind of its own.
You say very Oppenheimer-y?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a better way to put it, but there's just eerie sounds that create moods that don't necessarily have to be attributed to Oppenheimer. Much the same way you see the same thing with a couple of songs from like the Interstellar soundtrack pop up on TikTok as well. Or sorry, the Interstellar score. I better not mince my words today.
No, you're good.
That pops up too when people are trying to be cinematic and show cinematic, do things cinematically on TikTok. However you want to take that, you can take moods and emotions away from a score better and apply them to other situations better than you could a lot of the songs in different soundtracks.
It's really cool because effectively what they're doing with TikTok with these scores is what the filmmakers did originally with them, So the filmmaker makes the movie, the scenes or whatever, they give it to the composer, not in a complete form, obviously. The composer sees the scenes and goes, okay, this is what I'm going to make to capture this feeling, this emotion, this whatever. And effectively people on TikTok are doing that with their own things. They're taking the score and utilizing it to capture the same emotions in their own creations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned that because I did see a little excerpt of an interview with Hans Zimmer talking about how essentially they just asked, how many times do you watch a movie before you start composing the score? And he says, well, I've tried in the past watching a movie like 8-9 times trying to get the mood just right. But in reality, when I do that, I just wind up feeling numb to the movie and I lose the mood and the emotion that I felt the first time. So now I go into it kind of blind, taking notes as I see it the first time, and then just continually trying to capture that feeling, regardless of whether or not it actually winds up lining up with my memory and expectations. That's his process. And I think that's interesting. You do have a tidbit about Hans Zimmer that I'm dying to hear about.
Yes.
And
There's been some words on the grapevine about him.
And what are the words? I don't know. Because I grew up, I was a band kid in high school. So we were Hans Zimmer, nerds that just absolutely fell in love with him. You listen to a lot of movie scores and stuff like that when you're in band because that's what you have to compare it to. And it's more interesting than listening to the same classical music that you've been playing a lot. So that was my experience. What's the deal with him?
So we're all familiar with the concept of having interns, correct? Getting them to do work that you don't want to do.
Yeah. My favorite part of interns is that you don't have to pay them very much.
That's Hans Zimmer's favorite part about them too. So essentially, there's been, and this is a common practice in film composition, where yes, you have your composer, but he doesn't do the whole thing by himself, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
Especially someone like Hans Zimmer or Howard Shore, whatever, they do their own music outside of film too, and they tour and things like that. So Hans Zimmer is apparently getting a reputation of taking this to the extreme, though, where he's getting interns or people who want to be up and coming composers, whether it be for film or outside of film or whatever, and gets them to do a great deal of the work.
Really?
A great deal of it. What amount? I don't know. This is just what I hear on the interwebs. Okay. But for all I know, I might be completely wrong and smearing the name of Hans Zimmer for no reason. I'm sorry if that's the case. That's not my intention. No. But he takes it to a vast extreme where he just slaps his name on some stuff that he has nothing to do with.
No, I mean, it's inherently believable because one, just because I've listened to a lot of Hans Zimmer's music does not mean that I know anything about the man, right? Like you could watch a ton of Coen Brothers movies. That doesn't mean you know anything about the Coen Brothers' personal life. So how they treat their people is not indicative of, the music that they create. And two, it would follow a typical kind of stereotypical Hollywood theme, wouldn't it?
Oh, dude, absolutely. And I mean, I don't think he was always like that per se.
Probably not.
But he might have gotten a bit of that Hollywood mentality, which is benefit off of others.
Yep.
Which leads me to another great point, which is the cost of doing a score versus a soundtrack.
Sure.
So with a score, yes, you have to pay everyone in the orchestra or whatever, pay vocalists, all of that. But your big cost goes to the composer. Mm-hmm. But I guarantee to you that composer gets paid a hell of a lot less than Dua Lipa, Beyonce, whoever you have on the track.
Yeah, and that kind of makes me think, like when you mentioned that with the interns, I mean, if you just scroll through what John Williams, what John Powell, what Hans Zimmer, what I mean, there's a lot I can't really name because they have German names and I can't pronounce it quite right. But if you look through what they've created and their discography, essentially, you know how many movies they've composed for over the course of a given year, especially the bigger names. And so I can't imagine the demand of creating anywhere from 15 to 30 track composition for the sake of this movie at the pace that movies are getting pumped out. I mean, the stress. I'm not here in defense of not paying interns or not giving credit where credit is due, but I do there is a certain demand that I think is just inherently unreasonable, and that you go to like these big names for it because you want the big name. I can't imagine that they're able to keep up with it by themselves.
No, I mean, absolutely not. And I'm not trying to cause an absurd amount of shame or anything like that, but there is a line, to cross or to not cross. But when you have the fame of Hans Zimmer, I think the only other composer that can really come close to him in the, if you were to pull someone off the street and ask them who composes film scores, they would say Hans Zimmer, John Williams, That's probably it.
Yeah. I mean, I
Um,
know John Powell because he shares my last name,
Yeah,
and
fair.
also because he did Mr. and Mrs. Smith and the Bourne series, as
Hmm.
well as a lot of other, a lot of other movies. Recently, he did Migration, which
I didn't see that one.
it wasn't at the top of my list, but I'm
But
sure he did great.
but no, yeah. I mean, and someone of that pedigree, of that fame, obviously does come with a cost. So I'm not saying it's always a million times cheaper
That's
to hire a composer than it is to hire a big star to do your soundtrack. But another cost variable to look at is having someone create a song for your film or create an album for your film
Mhm.
or using already like songs that have already been made,
Right.
that have been popular in the past or not popular. So like
I feel like you're going towards The Graduate with
I
this.
am definitely going towards The
Yeah,
Graduate.
yeah, because okay, so I thought this was just like a random piece of trivia that turned out to be false that I've been carrying around for years. I thought that Simon and Garfunkel made they made Sound of Silence for The Graduate. Very wrong. They made Sound of Silence like 4 years earlier, but then they helped work with and create several different versions of it for The Graduate.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I mean, they did the whole soundtrack of The Graduate. So
Mhm.
Mrs. Robinson,
Yep.
Mrs. Robinson from The Graduate,
Mhm.
Scarborough Fair, all that stuff. I don't
Yeah.
know if Scarborough Fair was specifically made for the movie or also already made, but
I'm sorry we weren't alive in the 60s.
yeah, I mean, but I'm actually surprised it's taken me this long to talk about this movie on this podcast
Yeah.
because it is like one of my core films that like made me who I am.
Okay. Go off.
It was the first film I ever wrote an essay about in school.
Really?
Yeah, so very deeply embedded to me.
What was the essay about?
About why it is one of the most important films of the mid 1900s and all the things it revolutionized. But we won't dive into that today.
Okay, yeah, fair.
But pay attention to the costuming in that movie. But so something like The Graduate, where you get, I mean, Simon and Garfunkel, big artists.
Mm-hmm.
To what scale we can't say because we were not there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we're only talking about so many artists from the 60s, and
Mhm.
Simon and Garfunkel is one of them.
Exactly.
They okay, you just talked about how much you love The Graduate, and so I hope
Mhm.
this does not make you irate by any means, but in my opinion, what Simon and Garfunkel did for The Graduate kind of carried that movie.
I disagree.
Maybe carried is a strong term, but there are so many long scenes where, the movie would not have been the same without them, even close, because there's so many times where there's no dialogue and you're just kind of going with transitional scenes, or there's like chasing and you're getting a lot of emotion on people's faces, and that's all beautiful, but the atmosphere that their music provides to the movie levels it up so immensely and this was my first time seeing it. And
Mhm.
so it's not like I've seen it multiple times and I can really do a deep analysis into The Graduate. But that was kind of my experience, was just that, like, God, this music is really just, maybe it's not carrying it, but it's doing a heck of a lot.
I mean, it does do a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things in that movie that do a heck of a lot. Like you said, the transitions.
Mm-hmm.
Like that one transition where he goes from the pool to the bed.
Brother.
Bro, oh my God. Who in the 60s was doing that? If you're not a French New Wave movie, why are you doing that? That's
Bro,
insane.
When I saw that, I literally went, I don't do this with movies, but I paused, rewinded, and watched that 3 different times before I was
Insane.
allowed to move on with the movie, because I was like, I had to show Coco, and I was like, did you see that? That was
Insane, bro. But no, yeah, I won't dive too much into like all the great things about that movie. We'll save that for another time. But there's a lot that pulls greatness out of it. Simon and Garfunkel being a big part of that, and also that adds a lot of personality to the film, a lot of character to the film, and I think that's a really cool part of picking one specific artist to do your entire soundtrack if you're doing a soundtrack, because you can have it truly personalized. Like you can associate that artist with that film, like a Phil Collins with Tarzan,
brother. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and to a certain extent, this isn't always true, but I think if I'm looking at holistically the listening experience of all of the songs that come off of a movie, I tend to favorite those that are a similar situation to what we're
Mhm.
talking about, where it is one particular artist or maybe just a couple of artists collaborating on creating the soundtrack for a movie, because it is just such a unique experience. You typically get things out of that artist that you would never hear otherwise. And you also get a different experience in the movie that you would never get otherwise. It's an interesting hybrid where it's almost like these artists are composing their version of what they experience to be a score. And you get a real specific lens by which you're able to experience the movie through their ears, I
Mhm.
guess.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It's made with the story in mind, you
Mhm.
know? Absolutely. Whereas if you just do an eclectic group of songs
Right.
for different scenes that you pick out, it's not going to have the same weight.
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, when you talk about an eclectic collection of songs, I think of Black Panther,
Yeah.
because I like the movie Black Panther. It's fine. I like the soundtrack that came off of Black Panther. There's a
Mhm.
lot of great
Mhm.
songs that are on that soundtrack.
Mhm.
But it doesn't really, the soundtrack doesn't do much for me movie wise.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like these are that came off as more of this isn't just another way to market the movie than it was this is an addition to the film.
Mhm.
Whereas a situation like some of the other soundtracks that we've talked about, such as Baby Driver or Nick and Nora's playlist, Infinite Playlist, those are situations where that's a collection for a soundtrack, but that fits with the movie. The movie is asking for a playlist because that's a main part of what the story is about.
I'm actually really glad you brought up Baby Driver. A, because Edgar Wright is a really easy person to talk about when it comes to picking out soundtracks, but also B, because I want to talk about the Baby Driver curse.
Yeah, you mentioned this to me earlier, but wouldn't elaborate. I Controversial take, if you will. I love Baby Driver. Maybe it's because when it came out, I just fell in love with. I fell in love with so many aspects of that movie, and maybe it was just a culmination of a lot of other tropes I really liked. And I freaking love the song Bell Bottoms. That was such a
Mhm.
strong start, one of the strongest racing scenes I've ever seen.
Mhm.
And you're probably gonna crush me now, so.
No, I'm not gonna crush you. That's fine. I'm glad you enjoy a movie. That's a good thing. Um, but the curse that I want to talk about is how everyone, and well, not everyone, but more and more people involved with that movie are
Oh.
getting outed for being terrible human beings. You got
Yeah,
Ansel Elgort,
I know.
you got
Kevin
Jamie Foxx now,
Spacey.
Kevin
Wait,
Spacey.
what did Jamie Foxx do?
Oh, he's got allegations now.
Oh my god, brother.
Yeah, dude. And then the love interest in that film, I can't remember her name in real life, but she's in the Iron Claw and she's in Mamma Mia too. She was
Mhm.
a home wrecker, so like not a predator, but like that still
Yeah,
sucks.
just like not good person things.
Yeah. But curse aside,
Yeah.
that film and Edgar Wright in general is a big proprietor or user of the needle drop,
Mm,
where you set up the scene, the needle drop comes in to complement the scene
yeah.
or whatever, and you go from there and you get a lot of iconic moments that way.
So, Andreas, before you continue, I do want, both for myself and for the viewer, maybe in your own words, what is the needle drop that you're
Yeah.
referring to?
So needle drop is when you, for whether it be for surprise factor or whatever,
Hmm.
or just, just ties in well, you have the scene and then all of a sudden you just hard input the song,
Mm,
needle drop, like on a
right.
record player, and you go from there.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
in Baby Driver, the song doesn't start until he hits it on his playlist, and
literally,
he's
yeah.
literally holding up the
Mhm,
movie so that he can
mhm.
find his song and then he can race.
Yeah. A few other films that are really good about incorporating where the song comes from in the film itself, like pressing play.
Hmm.
Reservoir Dogs, Birdman.
Yeah, you're so right.
Reservoir Dogs specifically, I have a cool story for. They use actually a substantial amount of their budget to secure one song specifically, the one where he's like cutting off his
Yeah,
ear.
I was gonna say probably that
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
And they got the rest of the songs in like a bundle deal for a
interesting.
discount rate. And that's when they came up. I don't know. I might be wrong on this. I think that's when they came up with the radio idea,
Oh yeah.
but that might have been there from the beginning and I'm just misremembering. But that is also a cool talking point as well.
Absolutely.
Bundling up songs to acquire them, pricing that versus pricing hiring someone to create new songs. Also with Birdman, just it's really cool with the one take gimmick of the
Hmm.
film that he's just walking down the streets and then you just see a guy playing drums. And
Yeah.
and I think stuff like that is so sick.
Absolutely, absolutely. And folks at home, we actually know a couple of people that have worked in the audio industry for a while. So if you want to dive deeper into this topic of what it looks like from the industry,
Hmm.
let us know. Comment.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please do.
Because we are, but we lads in this subject
Yeah,
matter.
we are. We are. We're hitting it from a surface level, but
Mhm.
enthusiastic nonetheless.
But since we're talking about Reservoir Dogs and Tarantino in general, I do want to talk about his relationship with Emilio Morricone. So, for those who don't know or aren't familiar with Morricone, he's pretty much responsible for every iconic theme from westerns, Good, Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars,
Hmm.
all that stuff. That's Morricone. The Thing, stuff like that. And there are reports, not confirmed,
Okay.
that him and Tarantino had some beef about Django. Because
Really?
I think Morricone did a song for Django. He didn't like how Tarantino used the song, so they started beefing it out. And then this is
That's
also never confirmed.
That's a
but,
fight I would like to see.
But well, you never will. Morricone's dead now, so
Even more interesting.
But apparently they smoothed that out, and that's how Morricone did the score for The Hateful Eight.
Interesting.
Which
Okay.
also, interestingly enough, has a rumor that a lot of the Hateful Eight score is just unused stuff from The Thing.
Really?
Yeah, so that's also not confirmed.
Okay.
But
This is you just going through like film.
bro,
Reddit.
I'm just spreading rumors today, man. I'm TMZ.
You are. Yeah, Andres the Gossip Mill Lukic.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
Which is funny because like I always, talk bad about gossip and all that stuff, especially with film. But here I am.
Here you are. Here we are.
But
It's okay. These people will never hear what we're talking about. I'm so okay with that.
Mhm.
So, what is your opinion on Django's soundtrack?
I just want to know how we got Rick Ross on
How did
there.
we get Rick Ross on
How'd
here,
that
dude?
conversation
That's crazy.
go, bro?
That's crazy. Okay, so actually, it does make me want to talk a little bit about soundtracks that don't fit their time period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because certainly, people were not Rick Ross rapping back when slaves were around. But that still makes it hit. It's all about the impact. It's all about the emotion of kind of like, you can kind of think about the history of hip hop and that as a means of not only expression but also kind of rebellion from the establishment in the way that sort of like NWA was, and that can be kind of symbolic of the way that Django was trying to fight against his experiences. So you can use music not from a period to emphasize certain impacts, and that's been done in a lot of other movies. What are your personal kind of like favorite examples of that?
I mean, one that we both watched recently, Marie Antoinette.
Mm-hmm.
Because Marie Antoinette was not jamming out to "I Want Candy" and The Strokes.
No, she wasn't.
So
now, did you mention this as one of your favorites just because The Strokes are?
Well, I love The Strokes.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
but also since it's fresh on the mind, and because it is such a huge just time difference in general, because Marie Antoinette was several centuries ago. The Strokes is this century.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think that really ties in really well with what Sofia Coppola was trying to say, with the film
about Marie Antoinette. Yeah.
I know we talked a little bit before we started hitting record today, but about what she was trying to say about the character, the rebel-like attitude or mentality that she had. At least that was your point. I don't want to steal the credit for that. But
No. I mean, that's fair. It does give me. I mean, she was. I don't know a ton about Marie Antoinette. I'll be honest. But the impression that I got from the movie was that she was sort of rebellious in certain extent, or just did not care about what the establishment wanted her to live up to, and was forced to be in these situations where she either wasn't comfortable or she was just put up for display, had no autonomy, and so. Maybe in real life, maybe not. She wanted to kind of like fight back against that. And then you get kind of this punk aesthetic, not only in the visuals of Marie Antoinette, such as having that kind of like graffiti lettering slapped across the movie poster, essentially, but in the music that was picked for it as well. And then you mentioned her having Converse.
Yeah, she does wear
So
Converse in the movie.
That's also an example. One of my personal favorite examples of modern music being used for the soundtrack in older movies is actually A Knight's Tale.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, you got Queen going in there. We
Mhm.
Will Rock You. That was actually, I heard We Will Rock You from A Knight's Tale before I ever heard it just as a standalone song.
Before you heard it on Drake and Josh?
Yeah, exactly.
Insane.
I know. Can you believe it? Well, I was watching A Knight's Tale from a very young age.
That's
It was kind of, that was another one of the household movies we were watching growing up. But I think that was a fun example of it as well. And that one did not have to be, I don't know. When I think about the soundtrack to A Knight's Tale, I don't necessarily think of it being representative of something bigger in the movies so much as it was, this is a fun movie and this is a fun soundtrack to go along with it. We don't want this fun kind of modern take on older, kind of movie,
Yeah.
I guess, to be bogged down by flutes.
And it's really interesting because it's like a thing if it's in a live action film, but if you're making Shrek,
Yeah.
it's, totally, you don't bat an eye at
No.
a modern song being in that because it's an animated film, which is funny. And just goes into pointing out how people don't view animation as true cinema. But
you want to talk about iconic scores? Let's talk about how DreamWorks changed their entire intro song because Shrek was their most profitable and successful IP. Like that's crazy.
And it fits really well with the
It does.
with their animation intro, whatever. I also want to talk about your perspective or opinion on films where not only is the soundtrack made specifically for the film, but that is covered in the film. So something like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" or "Inside Llewyn Davis."
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because at a certain point, those movies bleed the line of almost being, certainly Inside Llewyn Davis more, of almost being musicals to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you think of a musical, you think of something bright and kind of Broadway, but
that is not Inside Llewyn Davis.
that is not, not even remotely. Inside Llewyn Davis is really quite depressing, actually, nonstop. And Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is just quirky and a fun odyssey. But those are, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's all really just another means of storytelling. It's not that I love it more than anything else, but I just think that it's fun. I think it's an exciting way to go about it. And if you have musicians as the main people, I think it's almost has more longevity to go about it that way than it does to try and make a big spectacle out of it like a musical. And maybe that's just, I like musicals, but I can listen to the music from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou or Inside Llewyn Davis way more often without being kind of overwhelmed than I can, some certain musicals and a lot of musicals out there.
There is no song in the world that I could listen to more than Dear Mr. Kennedy from Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yeah. I mean, beautiful songs.
I would like Adam Driver going, "Uh-oh," to be my alarm when I wake up in the morning, bro. Are you kidding me? But
Outer
yeah, space. But I love musicals too, bro.
Yeah.
I will be the first to say that I love musicals.
Yeah, this is not a musical hate speak that I'm trying to throw out there. It's just that I think the format is a little bit more palatable on repeat to go about it the way that Inside Llewyn Davis did or Oh Brother, Where Art Thou did.
Because like with musicals, there has to be a certain element to it that other soundtracks don't have to have. Yes, you're telling the story through the song, but especially with like a typical, not Broadway musical per se, but to kind of capture like the feeling or whatever of like the up, how there's the Broadway voice.
Yeah.
That kind of like intensity and everything to it. It can be kind
over
of
enunciation and stuff.
Yeah, it can be exhausting. Don't get me wrong. I listen to show tunes from time to time.
Yeah, a little bit of ragtime.
But yeah, exactly. But I could definitely it'd be a lot easier for me to listen to the soundtrack from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou or Inside Llewyn Davis because it just sounds like folk music.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And, it does make me think like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and Inside Llewyn Davis, those are both of those soundtracks are much folksier. Are there other kinds of genres where you can think, are there other movies that have done that don't have folk music as kind of the core center of their soundtrack?
Like not folk?
Yeah.
Pop Star.
I have not seen Pop Star. That's still on my watch list, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, dude. That's like an extreme opposite of it. And obviously that has the comedic aspect to it where like it's outlandish and everything, but it is still musical artists making songs in a movie or That Thing You Do.
What did and why am I not thinking about the movie Weird that came out last year?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
No,
I mean, it's on Roku TV. It's really easy to get to, but that was a phenomenal piece with Daniel Radcliffe killed it.
Oh, the
As-
Weird Al movie.
Yeah.
I just thought the movie was just called Weird. I haven't seen that, but
Yeah.
yeah. Another example is That Thing You Do, the Tom Hanks movie, which I guess we're not allowed to praise him right now, but
I haven't seen it.
it's essentially like another telling of the Beatles story.
Okay.
It has Liv Tyler, and everyone else in it didn't really do anything noticeable, but
a lot of high praise for this movie
it's
so
a
far.
perfectly normal average movie.
Okay,
But
love
the
that.
songs are bops. Yeah, and that's the only other example I can think of.
That's fair. I'm sure there's plenty more out there, but there's a couple other things that we want to touch on so far today. In particular, I think it would be fun to talk a little bit about the way that music has created certain tropes in movies. And what I mean by that is certainly somewhere there was a movie that did something for the first time, and that kind of created a certain expectation within the audience. If you've seen enough movies, you hear this kind of sound, this progression, maybe even a particular melody, and it leads you into a certain anticipation of a given feeling. So, for instance, one of the things that stands out in my mind is some of the iconic kind of, maybe they're not particularly songs that fit on the score, but there's a lot of music and sound out there that leads you to certain anticipation in horror movies.
Yeah.
So, obviously there's that in Psycho,
Mhm.
and there's other examples of that too, where there's nothing inherently scary, I guess, about dissonance, about two notes that don't create a harmony together.
Mhm.
But you hear that drawn out for long enough, and you know that something's around the corner.
Yeah, you get put on edge.
Yeah, you know that a
Absolutely.
jump scare is about to come out to ease your tensions so that the real scare can pop out in
Mhm.
a couple of minutes. Like that's
Mhm.
just kind of the formula.
Mhm.
Wh- Is that okay? Is that good? Is
I
that
think-
is that good? Is that good songwriting to pull on those tropes now after over a century of filmmaking?
I think it's good that we've allowed it to get us to automatically associate with this feeling. That shows the effectiveness of it in the past.
Mhm.
And that's the whole point of this, to make us feel something. And now we fully associate that.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. Now, when you get to the point of you start to expect things,
Mm-hmm.
that's a trade-off. That's
Absolutely.
bogus, because it hinders your experience. And when you expect something, like when you're watching in a horror movie and you're like, okay, jump scare is going to come now. It's a mirror shot. You know it's coming. Something like
Mhm.
that. Then you're pulled out of it.
Yep.
You're aware that you're on a roller coaster,
Yep. No, 100%. In my personal opinion, and let's be clear, this is pretty much a feature of movies that is specific to scores. I
Mhm.
can't think of a single example of this happening with a soundtrack, unless they're pulling classical music out of their ass to pull it off.
Mhm.
But my personal opinion is that there's a certain balance with the quality of the film and the quality of the score that allows you to get away with pulling with certain tropes. So, for example, you can have a good score that has these certain tropes in it, but if the film itself is not good enough to warrant that music, you wind up in a situation where it becomes very obvious that this movie kind of sucks. And it's hoping that the trope of the music and the audience's anticipation is going to lead you into a certain feeling as opposed to organically leading you towards that feeling.
Yeah, with horror.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. With horror, you have to have the audience feel a certain way.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you lose them. They start making fun of the movie.
Yeah.
So that completely makes sense to me. While we're on the subject of horror, though, I do want to touch upon something. When I'm talking about a score,
Mhm.
I feel like I made it sound like it exclusively has to be an orchestra or something like
yeah,
that.
fair.
A great example of an effective score in a horror film that is not typical instruments is It Follows, which
yeah.
is all done by Disaster Piece, and the very opposite of a typical orchestra. It's very digital sounding.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clear that up before we got even deeper.
No, 100%. I think that's fair. But yeah, I think that horror is probably the genre that falls victim to the idea of tropes in scores most commonly.
Mhm.
Although I would say that the same could also be said for anything that tries to live in the shadow of like a Star Wars or a Lord of the Rings and tries to have a big world with big epic moments. You're all just wishing that you were John Williams or what's his name?
Howard Shore.
Howard Shore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I feel like I've seen several movies that live in that kind of shadow that try to follow the same expectation. And I think in general, one of the cons, because we haven't actually listed any pros or cons yet.
That's so true.
One of the cons of scores is that it is more common to fall victim to tropes, and kind of lean into that.
Yeah, because like you said, everyone's chasing that Lord of the Rings, that Star Wars. If you're making some kind of medieval fantasy, whatever, with a big battle scene, you're going to go a very similar route that Howard Shore did, you know?
Yeah.
So there are limitations to it, absolutely. But also there are more possibilities, I believe. It's just you have to really be a genius to hit those.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to be a creative.
It's like you have to be good at your job.
That's
What
crazy.
the hell?
Yeah, it couldn't be me.
But no, you make a very valid point there. I also, since we're like talking about tropes, I want to point out things that we associate from songs that come from movies. For example, the opening of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which uses a classical music song that was not composed for the film. The film uses classical music that wasn't done by a composer, so it technically is a soundtrack. But when you hear the bon bon bon, you expect something grandiose to be revealed, like the planet Earth in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, listen, if the Minions have done it because of your movie, you did something good.
You can't. Okay, you did that with the Muppets and now the Minions. We can't keep pulling.
And I did it with the Simpsons too.
And you did it with the Simpsons.
Yeah.
I mean, but they're all valid points.
Yeah.
No, I think that's completely true. Especially, I mean, I can't think of a classical song that has been more abused by cinema than the song Lacrimosa.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No.
Or
how many YouTube videos have used it?
Yeah,
or like,
exactly. Exactly. Like, I get that those songs are bangers. Absolutely. Also the song Lux Aeterna, which is featured in also a version of it is featured in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then it was redone again for Requiem for a Dream.
Or Claire de Lune.
Yeah, Claire de Lune. Oh my God.
Dude,
Ocean's 11 and a million other.
Godzilla trailer. Oh my God.
Exactly.
But,
yes.
yeah.
They create a certain those songs kind of become tropes in their own right, even though they deserve to kind of stand alone as a song. When you use it and pull on it so frequently, it becomes a trope and inherently loses, I think, a little bit of its impact, unfortunately.
No, I agree, absolutely. So then you're stuck in a position where you're chasing that same feeling with a similar sounding song, but you don't want to sound like you're copying it. Yeah. So, I mean, this is also the same thing that every musical artist deals with too. Yeah. That we're fixating on right now, because everyone is trying to build off of something that was done well and popularized, but also do their own thing with it. So of course it's going to apply to scores or soundtracks or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. So definitively, let's go ahead and lay down our personal opinions on what are the pros and cons of scores versus playlists. Because so far we came up with one con for scores, and a lot of yapping. So a lot of yapping. Well, they came for the yapping.
They did come for the yapping.
I'll say one con about soundtracks, well, at least a soundtrack where you're using really big name artists, is the price point. Like I said earlier, if you're getting, like, if you're Barbie and you're doing all these huge named artists to make songs for it, and you just have them on one song, you know, that's gonna cost you a pretty penny, and the average film will not be able to do that. I mean, also just in general with a smaller budget film or an indie film or anything like that, you're not going to be able to afford any popular song, really. So you're going to have to hire someone, either a small artist to do a soundtrack or someone to do a score. That's going to probably be pretty simplistic if you're not wanting to spend a lot.
I think another con for soundtracks is that while you can pull on the popularity and the fame, and depending on the artist, how much they're trending to kind of boost the marketability of a movie, you're also kind of tying that movie indefinitely to the reputation of a pop artist who,
that's true.
As we all know, people who get big enough as individual artists do not typically have the smoothest downfall. They don't typically just kind of like fade out of the limelight. There is a lot of drama that can happen there. And so, you know,
Baby Driver curse.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so you're really tying your movie's kind of reputation to not only all of the Hollywood personalities that are already in the room, but then you're moving out into the music industry as well. That may not age well. I'm not saying it always will, but it may not age well. You're also probably with a soundtrack going to be pulling on kind of tropes from whatever pop music or music is popular of the time. And so that inherently just might not age well. A score is classical, and that's always going to have, I guess that's a pro of it. It's always going to have a certain level of, for the most part, as long as it's a good enough score, longevity.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. I think that's quite inherent.
That's super valid. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. There you go.
But yeah, also, I think something that's really worth pointing out is when you do a soundtrack, I kind of said this earlier, when you do a soundtrack, it's going to go one of two ways. Either A, you do the route with just one artist and it gives you personality or character, or if you just do a jumble of songs, you're not going to get that same effect. Whereas with a score, you're always guaranteed to get that personality, character,
Absolutely.
whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the kind of mixed nature of a soundtrack, usually at the very least, where it's coming from a bunch of different artists, can be a pro or con depending on how well it's actually applied within the movie. You know, you get a lot of different vibes when you're looking through something like, well, I guess Nick and Nora's Infinite playlist is all just very indie in 2008. But for stuff like Juno and Baby Driver and even Django to a certain extent, there's a lot of other movies out there that have soundtracks like that where they're all a bunch of different artists. You can pull out different moods. You can pull out different action scenes. You can have a really big happening kind of action scene contrasted with a really slow, smooth, more emotional scene. And the same can be said for scores, but it's going to probably impact your more popularly general audience differently with a soundtrack, I would say.
Absolutely.
Depending on how it's applied.
I think the big takeaway here is whether or not it works, whatever you choose, comes down to the filmmaker.
Wow, crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So do you want to talk about the best times it was done?
Yes.
Personally.
We're saying just personal favorites.
Personal
right?
favorites.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay, so I guess let's just go back and forth because I already know your one and then you already know my one. So we can just go ahead and list it.
Yeah, my favorite score is Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings?
Yeah,
I thought
who would have thunk?
Yeah, who would have thunk? Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly fair. Personally, one of my favorite scores, obviously, gonna have to be Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I think that's, if I had to pick a John Williams one,
Yeah.
I would pick Jurassic Park. Yeah, Star Wars is great, but I think Jurassic Park really...
Oh, it just, yeah, it's the Star Wars scores fit Star Wars very well. They're great scores for that movie, but I could just listen to the Jurassic Park score.
Also, Star Wars has the benefit of it evolved over several films. You know? Whereas, you have a lot of Jurassic Park movies, but really only the first one counts.
And actually, allow me to clarify. Okay,
please do.
My obsession is with the first Jurassic Park. I am always a fan of Jeff Goldblum, so I'm not mad about the second Jurassic Park. And the third one rounded it out, so that's fine.
Yeah.
I have not even watched a single Jurassic World movie because I do not want it to be tainted. My expectations.
If I could erase those from my brain, I would.
Well, I actually thought about it for this. Was like, should I go ahead and watch the Jurassic World and see if how the songs have adapted over time?
No.
And then I looked at the Letterboxd ratings and I was like, probably not. I think I'm okay. So the obsession really is specifically with the first. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But I mean, it's just, I hate that I'm using this word, but it is epic. It gives you an epic feeling, grandiose.
Grandiose. All right, we'll pretend you said that from the beginning.
Okay.
Another one I want to talk about that I'm very obsessed with. I touched up on this during our Christmas episode, and I'm so stupid for not remembering to say it until now. Spencer.
Yeah.
Oh,
which I still haven't seen. So you go off.
One of the most, the score from the 2020s so far that has impacted me the most. I will still complain every day for the rest of my life about it not winning the Oscar for best score, but just the way it makes you feel, the anxiety that Princess Diana is feeling in that film is just, also it's so jazzy.
Mm-hmm.
But also it suffocates you.
Yeah.
And I love that score so much.
My favorite jazzy score is The Incredibles.
Well, that's also a very good shout.
It's such a good one.
Yeah.
I love The Incredibles.
What about favorite soundtracks?
Favorite soundtracks, definitely Baby Driver's got to be up there. I mean, hate it or love it is what it is. It's a great soundtrack, and I have broken the law speeding by listening to bell bottoms on the highway. I actually specifically for a period in college asked everybody in my life to not play that song off of my playlist when I handed my phone because it would be a danger.
Wow. You're doing a service to society.
Really impacted me, yeah. So that's definitely got to be up there.
I already said The Graduate.
Yeah, The Graduate's fantastic. You're not wrong.
Yeah, but for the sake of saying something different that we didn't talk about earlier in the episode, Do the Right Thing.
Okay.
Because we were talking about earlier how certain soundtracks are implemented like you see them doing it, like Baby Driver, or like the other ones we said that I'm forgetting right now.
Yeah,
but
that's okay.
Do the Right Thing through Samuel L. Jackson's character as the radio DJ is super cool. Just laying it down, going with the feeling of the film. I just think it's super impactful, and that's why I want to pick that one.
Fair enough. Wait, is that your penultimate?
No. I just want to highlight it.
Just for soundtrack,
yeah.
No, that's fair. I also want to highlight. We talked about them already, but Reservoir Dogs as a fantastic one. So that's probably another that I would just recommend. I mean, it's just one of those ones where you could throw on a radio of almost any one of those songs, and I promise all the white people in your family are going to be happy.
Yep.
It's beautiful.
If I had to pick one song for a movie, though, I'm going to pick Dear Mr. Kennedy from Inside Llewyn Davis because I love that song.
Yeah, fair enough. So what is your movie recommendation based off the music? I'm shocked you haven't talked about Godzilla yet.
Oh my! I'm gonna have to bring down the audio on that. But oh my God, you're right. I have a lot to say about that.
You got 60 seconds. Talk about.
Okay, because also Godzilla, like I said previously with Star Wars, how they build up off of other films. You know, they can bring it up or whatever. With Godzilla, you have the same thing because you have Invasion of the Astro Monster, was a different theme. You have when Mechagodzilla is introduced, that's a different theme that comes in, and that's decades after the first one comes out. And also you have the Monsterverse ones that are adding on to that as well, with taking the original scores and just boom, adding a little bit more to it. You know, with King of the Monsters, they did really well with the drums on the original theme, but also in Godzilla -1.
Oh, I was gonna say, like in Godzilla -1, having that impact of going back to the original song was such a big moment.
Are you kidding me, bro?
The impact.
Exactly. Whether you're a traditional Godzilla fan and you get that needle drop of that original score, almost 70 years later, it's 69 years on. The impact that has on you is insane. But also as a new coming viewer, if you're not familiar with it, was also everyone knows the Godzilla theme,
right?
But that just hits. Hits. All right, that's my pick for everything.
There we go. That's your pick for everything.
Thank you for reminding me.
Okay. So my official movie recommendation for based off the music is actually not even going to be one that we've talked about today.
Ooh. Yeah, we're adding a lot more here in this closing.
Yeah, we are, and that's okay. People get it. My movie recommendation is actually going to be call me an e-boy if you want, but it's going to be 500 Days of Summer. I love a movie recommendation based off of the soundtrack. I can and have legitimately listened to the 500 Days of Summer soundtrack through its entirety many, many, many times in my life.
That's fair.
And Regina Spektor hits every time.
Yeah, that is fair.
She doesn't get the love she deserves nowadays.
Who doesn't love the Smiths?
Yeah.
I'll tell you who loves the Smiths, the main character from The Killer.
You're so right.
Also, now that you're saying that, I can't believe I haven't said anything about Call Me By Your Name, because that is the soundtrack I've listened to the most in my life.
Yeah. And you also didn't talk about Drive.
I didn't talk about Drive! I'm sorry, y'all. I let all of you down.
It's okay. It's okay. Just pick the one. Pick the one you want to recommend before we close out.
I'm legally obligated to say Godzilla.
Okay. Do you want to do a couple of special mentions?
Call Me By Your Name and Drive.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. That is the episode today, folks. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Go ahead and check us out on Spotify, Amazon Music, Google, I guess, if you want to, and YouTube. Not Apple. They still hate us. Yeah. We'll get there one day. We may put out a Patreon soon. Don't dislike this video for us saying that. This has been Sip of Cinema. Cheers.